Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for joining us for another episode of Psi Game Talks. And I'm with Mark Boccuzzi today. Did I say that your last name right, Mark?
Yeah, you did actually.
Okay.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's like my name is people say Eisler, Isler, Eiler. I get the gambit. So I'm glad to have you today. We've been working together a lot on many of the games that we are doing for the micro games at the Psi Games. And I also want to tell the world, like, I've really learned a lot from you during this journey, for a multitude of reasons. Not just even with just learning about, more about psychic phenomenon. You have a book out. We'll talk about that. So I learned from that. And then also your energy is always very, I would say like teacher-esque, so you're not even trying to teach, but you're teaching just by being a friend. And so I wanted to have you on here because I think more people should know who you are, because you've been in this world for a long time and you've been doing some amazing things behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, although you like to be behind the scenes mostly. So tell us about you, Mark. Tell us.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me, and thanks for having me involved in the Psi Games. It's very exciting. My name is Mark Boccuzzi, as you said, and I'm currently the director and co-founder of the Windbridge Institute, where we work to normalize, optimize, and utilize psi functioning. And in my capacity there, I've been working with Hakeem on building, as you said, building out these micro games. And my background is in computer science, so I'm a software developer, and I apply those skills to the study of psychic phenomena. And I've been doing it nonstop, or full-time, nonstop, since around 2005. As I said, I work behind the scenes a lot with different researchers, helping them develop their applications and their experiments. But I also run my own experiments, and I'm published in peer-reviewed journals. A lot of the work I do is with my wife, Dr. Julie Beischel, and we study mediums and afterlife topics, which the Psi Games isn't going into, but it's also a major part of my research as well. So that's I've always had an interest in parapsychology and psychic stuff, even as a young kid, and I decided to stick with it. And although I went into computer science and I became a video game developer and a video game producer first, I eventually moved over to the museum industry, where I worked with scientists and researchers on National Institutes of Science and National Institutes of Health. National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health projects. And that eventually led me into more consciousness research, where I ended up working at a university in a consciousness lab for a few years, and then eventually met my wife and set out on our own to study our own topics the way we thought we should do them. So that's my story in a nutshell. So.
Wow, that's a lot. but I would love to ask, like, the origin story. You hit some really interesting points, but what was your initial lead in to get to a point where you were like, oh, psi is something that I'm interested in, I want to study? Because you talked about you were developing games and you were doing all these different things, but there's probably that spark where you were just like, this is super interesting, and I really want to understand what's going on here, or just play with it, or whatever, however that transpired for you. Can you let me know a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, like I said, I've always been interested in this stuff, and I always found it really fascinating, but I decided early on that I probably wasn't going to make a living at it. I thought that would be way too difficult. And so I went into something more conventional. And my senior year in college, my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I came home and I was his primary caregiver for a number of months until he passed away. And I really started me thinking about, well, I'm interested in these various topics, but what about life after death? And can we study life after death? And what does science have to say about life after death? And I began digging into it more at that point, mostly studying haunted locations and after-death communication experiences and things like that. And so I spent a lot of time working in the field. And eventually, the more you work in the field, the more you realize, for me anyway, that some of the more interesting questions can only be answered in the lab. And it was during that transition that I started working more and started designing experiments specifically to study telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and psychokinesis. And it wasn't until like 2005 or so, after I'd met my wife, who was also studying survival, that I had a chance to break out and really dedicate my time and my professional career to the full-time study of those things.
So when you say the full-time study, what in this particular case, made you say, well, there's something real here enough for me to study? Because, there's still, even though there's all this information out there, there's all these people who still say, like, this is all just figments of our imagination. All these scientists, they just need something to look into. You guys don't really know what you're talking about. What was that thing for you to say, okay, this is my own personal mission, but then I found out this information, and that really showed me that there was something real here that I needed to stay on this case and even move into this in more depth like you have?
Mm-hmm. I'd say, like most people in my position, personal experience was one of the things that kind of threw me over the edge, right? Mm-hmm. So I was always a little skeptical, but then, I had an after-death communication experience with my father. I had another one with my mother after she died. I've had experiences with remote viewing and precognition and even psychokinesis. And I was like, well, if I'm having these experiences, then other people must be having them as well. And then I looked into the literature, and the scientific literature is very robust, actually. A lot of people think there isn't any science behind this, but we've been systematically studying these topics for nearly 200 years. And there's a large body of data around it. And then I started to realize, well, this is actually one of the most important and profound questions we could be studying. The simple fact that we're more than just our biology, that we are greater than the sum of our parts, that there's more to me and you and us and connection than just what we experience in our brains, that we have this non-local component that's connected through time and space and love, basically, if you're going to get right down to it. This idea that love is a universal connector that I know that sounds a little hokey, but it is. If you really look into it, it's this it's this binding force that keeps us all connected in life and death and beyond. And I thought, if that's not an important thing to study, what is?
Yeah, that's deep. That's deep. What was there a paper or something that you read when you say you looked into the literature that you remember being one of the most profound that stood out to you the most?
I think it was just the preponderance of information. I was surprised that there was so much. In 2005, I actually attended the parapsychology the parapsychology summer study program, which was put on by the Rhine Research Center, which is located in Durham, and the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is located in California. And at the time, they were located in Petaluma. And so I went to their campus, and I spent 2 weeks working alongside or watching people like Dean Radin and Christine Simmons Moore and other researchers. And just first off, had a lot of hands-on experiences with the actual equipment, with the actual experiments, and then got exposed to a lot of the literature. And the remote viewing literature I thought was incredibly strong. and worthy of further research and acknowledgement. The Gonsfeld research I thought was incredibly strong. So precognition, the dream telepathy research I thought was very strong. So in all these different areas, and even this PK, the micro PK research, I thought in all these different areas, there was enough data to support the existence of this phenomena, even though science was rejecting it, mainstream science was rejecting it, because they didn't have a formal mechanism. We know that the phenomena exists, we just don't know how or why it exists. And that, I think, has been the biggest stumbling block for this field. But I think the fact that these anomalies are there are worthy of our study and worthy of our acknowledgement, and to look at the human condition from a much broader lens than our very limited materialistic reductionist viewpoint.
That's really important. And I think, it's something that the more you hear people in this field talk about, they say that there's this, not necessarily a battle, but there's something hindering certain scientists from accepting. But we hear that throughout history. There was a time that somebody was talking about germs, and everybody was like, "You're crazy! What things we can't see in this air that are making people sick? Like, this is absolutely ridiculous!" And a time somebody talked about flying, and they thought that these folks were crazy, or that the sun was revolving around us, like, right. And then that was a crazy idea. Anything other than that was crazy. And there was the world was flat, and we would fall off the end if we traveled too far, And so, right. I mean, it's just all these ideas that when somebody would come and say, like, just the opposite. No, the world is round. No, we actually are moving around the sun. And no, there's this other stuff going on, and people were thinking that that was ridiculous. And eventually somehow something shift. What do you think that is from a scientific perspective? What do you think shifts in these places? Is it just clearly that one day we just have a way to measure it? Or do you think enough people believe in it to the point that it just becomes, the idea becomes a little bit more welcoming? And at that point, we start to find the answers to actually figure out the truth.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think in the phenomena that you mentioned, I think a lot of it had to do with better measurement and better technology allowed us to answer a lot of those questions. But there were still skeptics, right? So eventually, as we collected more data and the skeptics died off, more people began to accept that as the reality of our world. Now, I think with Psi, it's a bit more profound because I don't know, and I'm a technology guy. I'm a engineer. I'm a software guy. I'm a hardware guy. But I don't know that we'll get to the point where there'll be a specific technology that'll allow us to point and go, this is where Psi is happening, or this is a Psi signal, or this is. I think the implications of Psi are far more profound and would require a more fundamental philosophical shift in the way we perceive the world, right? So instead of thinking about the world as materialistic, right, where we have physics and then chemistry and biology, and then from those things emerges consciousness, I think we're really going to have to change our perspective to go, well, no, it's consciousness first, then physics, then chemistry, then biology. And that's a big shift for people to make, but it's the shift that fits the data. If you want to have a model that incorporates all the available data, then you have to start thinking about consciousness as primary. And of course, that's difficult for people to do because, again, it's this chicken and egg thing. We're like, oh, you have to show us the data. Okay, well, here's the anomalies. Well, you don't have a method. Well, the method, or you don't have a mechanism. Well, the mechanism is the primacy of consciousness. Well, how do you prove that, right? Like, so it's this ongoing debate. But I think eventually eventually, I do think there will be a paradigm shift, especially as we see more advances in other areas, like whether it's neuroscience or I'm not a quantum physicist, but I'm going to say quantum physics. They're going to show us that the world doesn't work the way we think it does, and it's going to open up more space for more questions. And I think that's when Psi will find its way in.
Yeah, I think what's really impactful about that is that there needs to be, it's like the materialistic view took over, and it kind of, in some ways, it was healthy because we had, let's say, if you had like a shamanistic belief system, right? And so sometimes those things didn't work, and people would die, and and then we came up with methods of measurement and methods of science that were helping people stay alive. But then it seems like it's kind of our nature. We just dive headfirst into that, like that's the only way, and we forget about these other things instead of bridging them. And it seems like we've come to a point where now we're recognizing that some of the things that these ancient healers and this ancient wisdom is not all bad, or not all made up. And so we took it as we grew in our scientific mind, that now all of this other stuff is just, hokey pokey. And now, like, for instance, we looked into brainwave data when people meditate, and at first there was no gamma. And then all of a sudden there was like, whoa, there's gamma. And then it was like, oh, that's it. But gamma's it. And then all of a sudden there was a higher state of gamma. And they were like, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, this is new. But the ancients were, and they got that information by studying Himalayan monks who were like, no, there's these layers and levels and so on and so forth. So there's an appreciation when you really dive into that for the ancient wisdom, that the ancients were able to ascertain and understand things about human nature, about the stars, about astrology, and how everything worked together, that they didn't have these measuring devices, but we were somehow connected as a measuring device or of some nature to be able to understand and gain data and information from the world. And it's not either or at this juncture. I think it's both, us really understanding and bridging both. And that's one of the things that I really like about you, is because you are this engineer and this software guy. And so you have created games and things, which is how we came to be connected in the Psi Games, because you worked for years and years and years on different games that you were using to help you determine psychic ability and so on and so forth. Can you tell me more about that bridge between that ancient wisdom, or the wisdom that you garnered, and then now bringing into the software and engineering development aspect?
Right. The fundamentals of Psi are based in the human experience, right? So we call the human body the human instrument. And we use the human instrument as a detector and a way to measure Psi experiences. So I think that you're right. It became very easy to throw out anything that was subjective and just focus on objective reality. And I think we're getting to the point again, like you said, that the acceptance of this ancient wisdom and this subjective reality is an important piece. So to explore that, over the years, I've developed a number of different online games and activities that people could play with, or I could run experiments on that that use their own intuition in order to complete various tasks, whether it was everything from like using an app to help people help a dog find his lost toys, to helping operators avoid roadside bombs in various scenarios. And listening to what people, how they felt about each one of those experiences, each one of those decisions, and then trying to cultivate that feeling within themselves so that they would become more accurate over time. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
that was a big question. So
that was a big question. And what has your experience been when you've been developing these games and having people run them and play them and go through the process?
What I find is that, well, one, there's evidence for psi, but the thing I always find is, so I gave a presentation a few years ago called Looking for Psi in All the Wrong Places. And it was basically this idea that, what scientists do is we look at the bell curve, right? So we're interested in what's going on in the middle of the population that we're looking at, and we're not too worried about the tails. I'm really interested in the tails. So if you get a bunch of people and you get a standardized protocol, say like the Ganzfeld protocol, which uses a sensory reduction method to test people in things like telepathy. So you get people, you put them in a Ganzfeld experiment, and then you're going to have some people that do really well and some people that won't, but you're going to have hopefully enough people that do well that you see an effect. But my question was, well, what about those people that aren't doing well? What is it about the Ganzfeld that they don't like or isn't? So my shtick has been to develop specific tests based on people's specific needs. So not try to get everyone to fit into the square hole of the Ganzfeld, but create different types of experiences that allow people to experience psi in the way that they would normally experience it. So like if a person really likes animals, for example, they may not find it very satisfying sitting in a dark room by themselves, but can I develop an experience around animals that helps them utilize or express or experience their psi ability, those kinds of things. So it's really about looking at the individual, looking at the individual's needs, cultivating various aspects of their personality, like thinking about how do you increase things like gratitude and belief and appreciation and integrity so that you can better understand your own psi ability and then have psi experiences out in the world.
Wow, that's huge. And that's why we found each other, because that's what the idea of the Psi Games is that, scientists are saying we're not having these results or they diminish when you put them in the lab. And I'm like, well, how do we meet people where they are, which was a concept that I got from my yoga training. How do we meet individuals where they are? And if they want to have fun with it, it's very little, people won't. Not a lot of people like to sit in a sterile laboratory with somebody like poking and prodding and having them doing the same thing over and over again 100 times. And it's got to be real sterile and boring, but a person will sit down and play Tetris for, hours at a time on the bus, at the train station, in the doctor's office, blah, blah, blah. And they'll just do it because out of just sheer desire, where they motivate themselves, sometimes because they want to get the high score, sometimes just because they don't want to be bored, but they find interest in it. And so you meet a person where they are. And I think that's really beautiful what you said. I don't think a lot of people think that way. They think this is my experiment designed in this very sterile environment, and you either fit in or you don't. And if you fit in, you're going to give me the data I want. And if you don't, it's going to give me the wrong data, but you're taking it from a different perspective. Well, why might this person not fit in? And how do we design stuff in a way that's going to be exciting for them to, get excited about? And maybe through that excitement, we see different effects, because that's where people want to be. And that's what we call, a matter of fact, one of our taglines for the Psi Games is Psi evolution through play. So we want to evolve this through a playing, fun, community style oriented thing versus a very different nature of, a very sterile, rigid environment, and see if we can get, enough data and get enough growth in that particular setting versus the opposite. And so that's really great to hear you say that is something that you're doing, and that's why we connected. That's why we're together in this
Right, exactly.
in this portion of the journey. Now, have you gotten a lot of heat from people in the scientific community for taking that approach?
No, people are pretty generally supportive, and they're curious to see like what kinds of things I come up with. It's been pretty positive. I do want to say that there's definitely a time and a place for those laboratory experiments,
Yes.
right? Because those are the experiments that have given us the groundwork to show that these phenomena are statistically significant. They're not just happening by chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that we have that body of evidence, that body of data, and that we got it in those rigorous ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? But my position is we've already proven this stuff exists, right? There's enough evidence to support the existence of telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis. Let's dig into the details. Let's see how we can optimize it for people to use in their daily lives. Let's see how we can use it to solve real world problems, right? Can we use mediumship to help people with their grief? Can we use psychokinesis to help with climate change issues? All that stuff. It's all wide open. It's all on the table as far as I'm concerned. So, I would say I'm probably not taken as seriously by some researchers. I have a lot of friends that are researchers, and they seem to like me. And I don't get a lot of people are like, you're dumb or whatever. But every once in a while, I'll do an interview or I'll say something, and there'll be something in the comments like, this guy doesn't seem like he's very rigorous, or things like that. And I'm rigorous. I have a whole pile of peer-reviewed journal articles that I've written and co-written. I've written book chapters for academic books. When I need to be rigorous, I can be rigorous, but I'm also kind of a mad engineer where I'm okay with like taking various aspects of Psi and working with people and understanding them and building something new or trying something weird or throwing something against the wall and see if it sticks and that kind of stuff. That's generally not the scientific process. The scientific process is much more rigorous and based on observation, and I base myself on observation, but it's a wide range of observations that I'm willing to mix and match and see what comes out the other end.
Yeah. So then when a guy comes to you and says, I got this harebrained idea, we're going to do the Psychic Olympics.
I'm like,
but I need you to develop these games, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Let's try it.
Whereas other folks I went to and had the same conversation, it didn't turn out. So other scientists, they were like, yeah.
Well, it's a tricky field, right? We're right on this cusp. I feel like, and a lot of people feel like, I'm assuming a lot of people feel like, we're right on this cusp of maybe being taken more seriously, right? Where this idea of consciousness as primary is getting more traction, where quantum physics is talking about various aspects that might make things like precognition actually possible. And so to do something that's more, for lack of a better term, I'll say spectacle, than hardcore laboratory science. And I don't use the word spectacle in a bad way. It's scary because if we know what works in the lab, but we don't know what's going to work out here in the events, right? In the Psi Games. So if it doesn't go well, what will skeptics think, right? And we're very worried about what skeptics will think. And will it hurt the credibility of the field? And will it hurt my credibility as a researcher and things like that? And I think skeptics are always going to be skeptical, no matter what we do, whether it's put on a Psi Games or run 100 more experiments. I think that unless we try something new and different, we're never going to move the needle in any interesting way. And even if the Psi Games, God forbid, only show people working at chance, at least we've shown people working at something. We've exposed people to something new and give them a new way to possibly think about their own experiences. I don't know. I think it's really important that you're doing this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And that is the overall goal too, is like, well, we want to show that it's beyond chance. We want to show that people are doing this in a statistically significant way in an environment that's out in the open with a bunch of spectators. So they're not the optimal conditions. And, you know, there's going to be blurry, weird lines because, of course, some scientists are going to say, well, how did we know the crowd didn't influence the PK? You know, their desire to want to see this person do well, and all that stuff is like, okay, that's still cool. You know, like whether the crowd helped influence it or the person did it themselves, man, that's still pretty cool if it comes out statistically significant, and we did it in a major public way, and so. You know, and I love it again, because what we're saying and what it sounds like you're saying is it's not either or, it's what would the world look like if we had both.
Right.
We had the rigor and we had the scientific people that were doing their things. But then we had this fun thing that was accessible to all people, people could just show up and they could say, I want to try and I want to have a good time. And, you know, we do have an assessment. So we do have an assessment, thanks to you. We have these games that people play, and you gave us the statistical understanding of how well the people have to do in order for it to be statistically significant, so that we can choose from a pool to say, hey, you guys made it on to this next level. So we have people who can do the thing, come in trying out to do the thing. Now, whether or not they perform really well on the day of the Psi Games or not, then that's just like any sport, where a basketball player may not, you know, in the court or in practice, you're doing the test and they score 80%, and you're like, oh, they have a percentile of shooting a foul shot 80% of the time they make it in. But then all of a sudden they're at this game, they get on the foul line a bazillion times and they miss every shot. It doesn't mean that they suck. It just means that they didn't do well that day, and you have data to back it up. And that's the grace that, you know, you don't get in a field like this, but we seem to give it to a lot of other scientific fields. But when it comes down to this, you know, then all of a sudden it has to be perfect, you know, or else it's not real.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And give me 1 second. I just want to make this point. A young lady, Dahlia, she was with me at this event, and we would take the blindfold, we put it on people, we tell them to put it on Dahlia anyway, she put it on, and she just started reading stuff, you know, and then all of a sudden she became like a spectacle or some sort of like challenge to everybody there, where they wanted to start creating, oh, okay, well, what if I put 5 layers? And then she's like, okay, well, I think that's this. Oh, she got it right. What if I put 10 layers? What if I put it behind my back? What if I put it over here? And then when she started to struggle, then they're like, oh, see, told you it's not real. Why can you see through 5 layers, but you can't see through 10? You know, why can you see through your mask, but you can't see it if I flip it around? Like, what is that? That's not real. And it was like, wait a minute, would you do that with anything else? You know, like if we say, hey, you know, this guy can make it facing the basket, but then when we turn him around, if he can't make it behind his head, then he's no good as a player. What are we saying here? You know, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. At some point, you have to optimize the conditions for the phenomena to take place, right? You can't just give somebody a book, make them sit in the dark and go, okay, read the first chapter, and then conclude they can't read, right? Like that's dumb, right? And that's a lot of what skeptics want, and you know, all that kind of stuff. And we see that a lot with mediumship research as well. People are like, oh, the medium should be able to do X, Y, and Z under these kinds of conditions. And we're like, no medium can do that. That's not what mediums say they can do. So yeah, I hear you. And I just want to circle back to one thing you said, which I loved, was at the Psi Games, if a PK event happens, how do we know it's not the crowd? I love that, right? Because that's the way the world works, right? That's Psi in the real world, right? It may not just be me. It may not just be you. It may be the friends that are hundreds of miles away that are like, oh, I hope this thing goes really well for Akeem, and I hope Mark is able to get his thing done. And, I gave a presentation once about a PK experiment I was doing. And I was talking about like mind matter interaction, and like so is my mind going to interact with this equipment, and how do I know it's going to be real, and blah blah blah. And this was a time when my mom was alive, and she called me during the middle of the experiment, and I was like, hey, how's it going? And she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm doing this experiment about this thing. Now, my mom was super sweet and a smart lady, but she had no idea what the hell I was working on. Like you're talking about like psychic ability. She's like, I'm going to go play golf. And so she we have a quick conversation. I'm like, I got to get back to work. She's like, okay, I know your experiment's going to go well, and hangs up the phone. And I'm like, great. Now I have another confound. Not only do I have to deal with mind matter interactions, but now I have to deal with mom matter interaction. Because she set the intention that my experiment is going to go well. So how am I going to tease that apart? Anyway, that's a silly
no,
story.
that's a fun story. I love it. And we multiple people know this. Like if you even think about for me personally, my mom has she's very religious. She has a prayer circle, a prayer line. They get on every morning at like 5 a.m. or something like that. And people can bring people to them to pray for. And it's like, so we kind of understand, like if you put intentions out there as a collective, those intentions can really like influence, what happens, out in the world. And so this, whether it's a collective or not, and I love how you said that's how the world works, because even piggybacking on that, we know there's been experiments done that before a very tragic event happens, the consciousness of people, groups of people all around the world will have, and if it'll fluctuate for that event. Do you know about those experiments? What are they called? Do you have it?
Yeah, there's a project that's been going on for ages, and it's really cool. And there's a new version about to come out. It's called the Global Consciousness Project, or GCP. And in short, what they do is they get these devices called random number generators or random event generators, abbreviated RNG or REGs or RNGs. And so like this is an example of one of them, actually. It's a very small device. They come in different form factors, but this one plugs into your computer. And what it does, it's an electronic coin flipper. And so it generates hundreds, if not thousands, of coin flips a second. And so it can produce a heads or a tail. And in the lab, then this was done at a lab called the Pear Lab, which was at Princeton University a number of years ago, was where the GCP got its start. But the people at the Pear Lab would get an individual and they'd sit them down in front of a random number generator and say, listen, I want, through your intention and attention, I want you to make the device generate more ones than zeros, or more zeros than ones, or an equal number of zeros and ones. And after a number of trials, they found out that people could do that, that people's intention and just putting their attention on these quantum level devices could affect their output. So the idea was, well, what happens if we get a bunch of these things and we put them all over the world and we network them together? And can we see if there's a global consciousness effect, right? So if people around the world are focusing on a specific event or a specific time or a specific thing, do we see variations, statistical variations in the output of this network? And the answer is yes. So during tragic events like 9/11 or other events like, funerals of famous people, or where it has global attention, an event that has global attention, you see variations that would not be expected by chance in this network of random number generators. And so these devices have sort of become synonymous with, well, at least for me, as devices that allow interaction between consciousness and the physical world. So you can build games, and like we've done actually with Psi Games and other tools that will change their output or do different tasks depending on what the output of the device is doing, and that output is potentially dependent on a person's consciousness, intent, or attention.
Wow.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
That was a lot.
That was a lot. That was a lot. We'll give the audience a chance, so take a breath.
Breathe that in.
Breathe that in. Exactly.
Right.
I think what's cool about that, so there's two things I want to do. First, I want to give a shout out because that's kind of what Entangled, made by Adam Curry, is kind of doing, correct?
Yeah, exactly. He's created a localized version of the Global Consciousness Project that runs on your phone.
Yeah, so get the Entangled app. That's a shout out to our buddy Adam Curry. But then there's also I have a group or a friend, and they're sponsoring the Psi Games as well. They're called Prosper, and Prosper is putting together an app where you can go to it and you can choose to do prayer or something of that nature, or meditate on a particular issue, but you can get other people who are interested in that. So maybe it's global warming, maybe it's, crime in South Africa or whatever, and you can get a bunch of people who are interested in that topic to focus on that topic, and you guys can set times across the globe that fit for everybody to sit down and meditate and work on that focus on that particular challenge or issue or whatever it is that you're trying to, whether it be a person, whether it be an idea, whether it be an event, or whatever the case may be, it's a way for people to coordinate. So I know it goes deeper than that, but that's kind of on the surface. But then my third piece to this is that's, from what I understand as being a yogi, that was what I was told one of the works of the renunciate. The renunciate and renunciates throughout the world, they kind of move away and go into a cave. And quite often, a lot of their work is supposed to be maintaining and balancing the vibration throughout the planet, right? Their sole intent is to create this level of love, light, and growth, pure consciousness, purity of consciousness throughout the planet and the globe and wherever else, that reaches to. Do you know anything about that?
I do not know anything about the renunciant specifically. There's been a series of experiments around what's been called the Maharishi effect, where you get a bunch of people and they perform transcendental meditation or practice transcendental meditation, and with the intent of, say, lowering the crime rate in a specific area, or fixing the water in a certain area, or whatever the thing may be. And they've done this several times, and they've had good results where they've seen lowering of crime rates and other things with a group of people. When they set that intention and they sit together and they really focus on making that physical change in the world. And so that is all, I think that's all tied in, right? It's all tied into the groups you're talking about. It's all tied into the Global Consciousness Project. Instead of having an effect on electronics and quantum systems, you're basically trying to have an effect on the systems that are around people. And that, when I say it like that, it's like, oh boy, that raises a lot of ethical questions, right? Like, do you have the right to change people's behavior? But do you have the right to live in a safe city, right? So how do you achieve the goal of safety, for example? Is it through policing or is it through meditation, right? And which is going to work and which is going to be better and which is going to be more helpful? And, it raises a lot of questions. I actually wrote a book called Ethical Considerations of Applied Psi and afterlife science that talks a lot about a world in which Psi and afterlife science is accepted as real, and what some of the implications are that, from everything from informed consent to intellectual property rights. And it's a weird little book, but I like it a lot. I would recommend it if you're interested in those topics.
Yeah, I actually have not read that, so I need to get that, because I've been working on a term called cynetics, and the idea of creating a term, not using old terms and recycling them, because things like psychotronics, things like psionics, all these things have connotations that they weren't designed to have ethics necessarily in mind. And so when we start talking about creating a framework for how we're going to look at the future of Psi, then we should probably start building a term that incorporates, when people define it and when they think about this term in their mind, they think about ethics as the foundation of it. And what would that look like? If I can look in anywhere at any time, and you're teaching people this, there's probably got to be some ethics behind it. If I can influence behaviors, or, talk to people's subconscious, or, or get information from people in from the afterlife. I mean, these implications that are varying, and they could be very dangerous, and they could be far reaching. So we need to have some framework on how to deal with that we work with when we help people grow in these methodologies. So that book needs to be at the Psi Games, by the way. So hopefully we get some to Michael Green, our guy that's selling books. So we got to get that.
I think my books are all available on Amazon. So I don't know if he can get to them or not, but I'll pop him a note. But
what are your other books, by the way, while we're on
my other book that's related to Psi is it's called Unlocked, How to Unleash Your Psychic Ability. And that's available on Amazon. And that talks about building a psychic framework for yourself. It's these 10 sort of, I hate to use the word tenets, but sort of approaches that you can take to, like, get your head straight and get your soul straight, and then act out how to be in the world as a psychic being, to live in a psychic world. And it talks about how to find and utilize various psychic signposts, like synchronicity and dream telepathy or dream precognition or gut feelings and things like that, and how to recognize them and how to discern them from your own ego, and discern Psi information from your own ego information, and things like that. It's a cool little book. I really like it. I'm really proud of it. And it's simple and it's easy to digest. And, I'd recommend it if you're someone that's interested in sort of exploring your own Psi ability. Because a lot of times what happens is people are like, oh, I want to do Psi. So they take a class on, say, remote viewing. And maybe they have a really good experience while they're in the class, but then their abilities seem to taper off after a while, right? And then they get frustrated, and then they're like, oh, this isn't real. I was just in the moment, or just beginner's luck, or whatever that stuff is. So my book takes a slightly different approach. It doesn't throw you into, here, learn how to do this psychic modality. It eases you into how to understand your own psychic ability and how you're getting your own psychic messages from yourself in your daily life. And once you have that grounding, you can move into things like remote viewing, if that's the right modality for you, or dowsing, or mindsight, or whatever modality seems to be working best for you. You can try them, but you're always grounded in your own psychic ability, your own psychic space.
Wow. Now, you were about to mention something to finish out the ethics aspect too. I wanted to bring you back to that just before we jumped into that. Yeah. Yeah,
I was going to say the ethic, you said, the ethics can be very dangerous, and you're right. There's a lot of things to consider, but it can also be profoundly transformative, right? It may require us to take a step back and really rethink what we think about things like privacy and things about ownership and intellectual property. And, if I can get information from the future that I didn't come up with, but I'm stealing it from somebody else's idea that they haven't had yet, like, what does that mean? And do I really own it? Right. So can I put a patent on that? Right. Like, just crazy stuff like that. And a lot of people will argue, well, that's not the way Psi works. And those are too speculative, and that's, all that kind of stuff. But I would say that we're just at the tip of truly understanding how Psi works. We've had we've been studying Psi for a long time, but it's been very narrow. It's been with a very limited population. It's been with very limited methodologies that only look at very specific things. And once the guardrails come off and people are like, oh yeah, Psi is real, and there's no more stigma about studying it or being involved in studies or talking about it, what does that mean? How is Psi in our society going to grow? How is our understanding of Psi in our society going to change and evolve? And I think that to me is really interesting to see how that plays out.
Wow. Yeah. That is, I didn't even think about this idea of IP from grabbing things for the future. And I know friends who have certain groups that are doing, playing with those experiments. And so, but I've never made that connection. So that's pretty intense. I have heard about getting to a level of certain practices where you can, where I have a friend who was hired to be, to help a police department find a missing person who was kidnapped by these two gentlemen. And that's all they knew. And this psychic friend went out into, wherever, and found these individuals and tried to interrogate or question, their subconscious. And one was completely shut down and the subconscious, but the other person was subconsciously deeply not wanting to hurt or kidnap this person. So their subconscious told, or in her words, told her where the kidnappers were with this young lady. She gave that information to the police officers, and they found her. They found a young girl right where this person's, subconscious supposedly told the psychics, mind where it was at. Now, of course, there's some skeptical weirdo out there is like, yeah, that's because the psychic was in cahoots with the bad guys,
the kidnappers,
with the kidnappers, but really, her story saved this girl's life. And then you have another whole group that is probably like, yeah, but she's still evil,
Right. Yeah. I get on these not talk shows, but I do a fair amount of interviews, not a ton, but and eventually someone will come up and say, well, when he talks about using mediums to talk to the deceased, he's not talking to the deceased, he's talking to demons. And you shouldn't allow witches to live, and you shouldn't, Deuteronomy says, whatever Deuteronomy says about psychic ability and, necromancy and, all that stuff. And so, yeah, there's a huge, there's a large intellectual divide. There's a large cultural divide. This is an area which is like fraught with landmines, right? Like, I've had over the years with my research into survival, I've had people call us Nazis and say, oh, we kill Nazis, and, various other threats, and people telling me we should, I don't have a PhD, but assuming I did, they'd be like, you should give your degrees back. And, because you're just horrible. And, calling mediums psychic vampires, where we're like, oh no, they're actually really helpful. The data show they can actually be really helpful for some people that are really grieving the loss of a loved one. A meaningful mediumship reading can really help alleviate grief for some people. And we get, static for that. So it's an interesting field. And a lot of people are like, oh, you're just doing it just for the money and for the fame. And I'm like, oh no, Trust me, there are plenty of other things I could be doing for money, and I'm certainly not interested in the fame. But yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, I like that we hit on that topic because, it is, like you said, it's a slippery slope and you got people on all different aspects and spectrums. And hopefully as we get more understanding of consciousness and who we really are as these deeply, profoundly multidimensional beings, that we were able to be connected really well. That leads me into another aspect. I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard about that. Sometimes, quite often, people who have experienced trauma in their childhood and are timid or have a lot of fear do really well with psychic abilities. Have you seen that in your research, or have heard of that? That quite often adults who came up in very tenuous environments and in stressful environments tend to be really good at psychic abilities, or have a lot of strong psychic abilities, because sometimes I've heard that it might be because they've had to always be aware of where the danger was coming from and how to stay alive in these really hard circumstances. Is that something you've heard as well?
Yes. Anecdotally, I've heard this about psychics, but we've actually collected data around mediums. And the mediums that we've talked to and tested and interviewed all report high levels of childhood trauma. So there does seem to be this link between childhood trauma and the development of psychic abilities. And this, and it makes sense, right? For all those reasons that you just said, right? Like, is it safe? Do I, who do I talk to? Who shouldn't I talk to? It is someone coming home that's going to hurt me or harm me, or coming over, like, all those reasons. What's interesting and terrifying about that is, there's always, I don't know, there's always a flip side to all this stuff. We published that research, and I've been about mediums and childhood trauma. And I not long afterwards, I was contacted by a group of people who said, well, will it work for kids? And like, how much trauma is okay to give my kid so that they become psychic? And I'm like, what
scary.
The frack? And I'm like, no amount of trauma is okay to give your kid. Like,
exactly.
Are you kidding me? And that was actually a conversation that came up a few times, which again, like, leads to all these questions about, like, are we even ready for this kind of research as a society, right? Because these people are thinking, oh, if I could traumatize my kid just enough, then they'll get on TV and they'll be a great psychic and they'll be able to, be on Oprah and have this great life or whatever. Like the potential for exploitation and abuse is just, it's so high and so prevalent in our society. I don't know.
Yeah.
And again, I'm being kind of negative and kind of bitter, but I was and cynical, but I was really taken aback by like that's where someone would go with this research.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, let's hurt kids. Like, are you kidding me?
Well, there is a recent interview that was done with a gentleman who was talking about these psychic abilities and how there were certain programs out there that were, taking people and subjecting them to certain things to kind of enhance these abilities because they found that they were coming out. And somebody had asked me about that in regards to the Psi Games. And I said, well, my personal belief based on my research is that, a person, because there is also this belief that the only way that you can get these abilities is through through love and light and, meditation and positivity. And that's not the only way. Because now we have this understanding of trauma and fear, and these things could also create these and make these abilities strong. And so when the person asked me about that, I said, well, I'm going this way with the love, light, play, happiness. Let's come together, community. But yeah, that does exist. And he said, well, what do you think about that? And I said, well, it sounds to me like if we were to put it like make it easy for people to understand, they're making the Sith, and I want to make the Jedi. So
Right.
so I want to create people who are well balanced with ethics, who understand our multidimensional nature, who have this conversation like Yoda had with Anakin when he was a kid, like, hey, fear is not it's we have fear, but don't let that rule you. That shouldn't be the reason you want to do these things. And oddly enough, I'm going to use that to segue. I have had so many daggone conversations with people about the Psi Games and their fear that we are somehow using it to find who the most psychic people so we can steal them away and use them in the government deep dark lab. And Hakeem's an ex-PSYOP guy, so that's what he wants to do. I'm like, no, you're right. I'm an ex-PSYOP guy. That's how I know and I see what's happening here. What's happening is that just like with, let me backtrack a little bit. If we say, did the government really cancel the remote viewing program? Up until recently, a lot of people were saying, oh, yeah, of course, because it didn't work and blah, blah, blah. But now we know. We had Skip Atwater, who went on Sean Ryan. He said that he knew of 5 total programs, only one of them being the remote viewing in the Army, that he had personal access to. He actually told me that story in person, and I never told anybody. And then I saw my Sean Ryan. So I'm like, yeah, I can speak about it now. And that he had certain access that other people did not have, so they wouldn't know, right? So if you ask, let's say, another person in a remote viewing program, they wouldn't know so they would say, no, it got shut down because all they knew about was the one Army program, but he knew about 4 others. Then we had Hal Puthoff, who went on Joe Rogan, and that kind of question came up, and he said, well, when this program was shut down, some people who were involved with it from up high called me up and asked me if I would be willing to start another program that was super secret that nobody knew. And he was like, no, I had moved on to this other stuff. But what I can say is they probably asked me, I'm sure they had a contingency, they had a backup if I said no. So between those two, we know that this thing is still going on. However, one of the ways you keep the world in the dark is you have to, if this is something that everybody can do, which they found everybody had this ability on some level, some better than others. But they couldn't stop it. They didn't have a way to stop you from looking into the government documents, which goes back to what we were talking about with ethics. Mm-hmm. Then the only thing you have to do is disinformation. That's the only thing you have, is to say, well, it didn't work. We did the research. It was all crap. It's all made up, so then people don't want to go down the rabbit hole. They don't want to waste their time. Right. And right. So that's one of the ways you could do it. Well, another way you can keep people from really embodying the true nature of who they are as these multidimensional beings is to say, there's nothing to see here. This is, make them stay disconnected out of fear, because we know that divide and conquer as a tactic is what really truly works. When people come together in mass, their ability to change everything is second to none. So the way we keep people from coming together is we give them this boogeyman idea that if they get together, we're going to pop up and we're going to take them, And so then people say, well, I can't go to the Psi Games. I can't support that, because if I do, then all of a sudden I'm going to be singled out. And I'm like, what better place to be than in a group of loving psychics who say, where did John go? Oh, we need to find him. Let's all go home and meditate and see if we can figure out where John is. Not John being the psychic guy in his basement all alone, doing stuff, and then he's discovered. So how do we bring ourselves together, bring this community together, so that we can start to raise the vibration as a collective, as a people, and then really start to have these conversations about ethics, have these conversations about how these abilities should be used or how they could be used. And when people are having these profound abilities, help guide them and mentor them and give them collaboration, not isolation. Isolation is how predators work. That's how abusers work. They isolate you because they don't want you to have support. So you're telling me that me offering and building a space for us to come together in fun, in play, in love, in community, somehow that's wrong? It's crazy to me.
Well,
I get the fear, but I'm also like, come on, guys. Can't you see what's happening here? They want to keep us separated, and it's been working.
Mm-hmm. I think what you said is all of what you just said is profoundly important and spot on. Obviously, the keeping people, and I know this from my own research and from my own interactions with people. You just want to get people on a list, or you're running experiments in such a way so that you'll discredit. The whole point of your operation is to discredit psychics, or sorry, I had a point and I just lost it. But anyway, what I thought you said was really important, and the fact that you are building this environment where people can come together and collaborate. I think that's super important. So.
Yeah. And what you said with the global consciousness, if we set the intent to protect ourselves as a united community, we will be protected.
Right.
If we scatter around and everybody's doing all this stuff, that's, again, like I said, that's how predators work, like the single fish or the single gazelle hanging out that's the one that's that's in the most danger, Right. But when all of the gazelles are together, we have a chance, we have a chance to make it out of here. And so that's one of the things that I think we need more of. And I hope people see that. But I know there is a lot of fear out there, and I understand where it came from, and I understand why it's there. It's meant to keep us separate. So if you're watching this and you hear this, I'm okay with you being skeptical and coming, because when you get to the community and you set the intention with us in love and compassion, then I think it'll change your mind. But again, maybe I'm biased, So there was we're hitting an hour, but there was one other topic I wanted to get back to because we didn't get a chance to really dive in. So give me a few more minutes if you can.
Yeah, sure.
And that is the REGs, because you've built these games around these random event generators or random number generators. And so like one of our games is, spin the wheel. You got to control like this wheel, or we call it wheel of influence, and so, and you're trying to influence where this digital wheel lands. And people will probably look at that and say, well, it's just whatever. I don't feel connected, or it's just happening, because it's going to stop anyway. And can you tell me a little bit about some of the science that goes in behind that?
Sure. So as you said, the wheel of influence is a wheel on the screen, and it's divided into a pie shape with numbers. And then there's a target number that's displayed, say 3, for example. And then when you click the button, the wheel will start to spin and it'll land on a number. And your goal is to make the wheel land on the target number. And the way we do that behind the scenes is we use a random number generator, just like this one, that's attached to the computer, that's constantly generating random numbers. And it randomly picks the target. And so there's no way to predict what the target's going to be. And then it randomly selects how far the wheel is going to spin on any given click. And the idea is that because of this randomness, because of this quantum interface that's now available to your consciousness, you can influence just how far that wheel is going to spin and land on your target. Does that make sense? I know that's a lot to take in. You have to buy into the idea that there's a thing called psychokinesis, and that psychokinesis can affect the output of random number generators, and that output can be that output is reflective of your intention.
Mm-hmm.
So those are all the factors that are kind of working behind the scenes that allow you to influence the wheel as it moves and the target that comes up.
Yeah, and we have it so that if you, let's say the number 6 and you land on 5, you still get some points because that's still pretty close. But maybe you get, to kind of help, push you along to, it's not killing your motivation, but you get the max points for landing on the 6,
Right.
and then we play that a bunch of times and you get some good data from that.
Right. Yeah, it's a really fun game. I think it turned out really well. I think it looks cool and the sound effects are nice, and the way the reg, I like it. We spent a lot of time on it, and the reg piece is actually pretty good. It's well thought out and well implemented, if I do say so myself. So yeah, I think it's a fun PK test.
Yeah. Now, you and I were talking and you were telling me about like intuitive data sorting and, this decision augmentation theory and these theories that also are layered in games like this because they could be they could pop up in these games. And I think they're just really interesting for people to know that these things even, are theories that exist out there. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So decision augmentation theory and intuitive data sorting, they're very similar. I'm going to get dinged for that, but they're pretty similar. The idea is that it's really difficult. So like we want to do a PK test, a psychokinetics test. And so how do we isolate psychokinesis in this one test? And the reality is that that's hard. Because we don't fully understand how psychic functioning works, and there's always an alternative explanation. So, for example, in our wheel game, let's say there is no psychokinesis. It's just the random number generator picking a random number when I click the button at a certain time. Well, decision augmentation theory would say, I click the button at a time when I know the random number generator is going to pick the number that I need. Right? So I'm precogging the result of the experiment before the experiment happens.
Wow.
Right? So and that, if you take that, you can apply it to almost any micro psychokinetic event. So there's a huge confound, not a huge confound, but PK and precog may be the same thing or different sides of the same coin, for lack of a better explanation. And it's really difficult to tease those things apart. So some people would argue, well, what makes more sense? You're precogging the future, or you're using your intention to change the electronics to do like, Occam's razor sort of idea. I don't know, but I'm willing to test PK and see what happens. I don't know. Did that answer your question? I hope
There's two things that need to be defined really quickly, and then, micro versus macro, anything, maybe the audience doesn't know what that is. And then also that same idea that you're talking about with these differences can cross over different disciplines, which we were going to go in. But let's explain maybe micro and macro, and then talk about that.
Sure. So the difference between micro and macro PK. So micro are little things and macro are big things, in so many words. So in parapsychology, when we talk about micro PK, we're talking about events that happen on the quantum level, things you can't see with the naked eye, and things that you need statistical analysis in order to determine whether or not there was an effect. Macro PK, on the other hand, is big events, things that you can see with your naked eye. Like if I'm holding this thing in my hand and it suddenly or on a tabletop and it suddenly moves 4 inches or whatever, that would be and there's no other reason for it to have moved, that would be considered a macro psychokinetic effect. And we see that kind of thing in back to mediums, like with physical mediums, like mediums that produce physical effects like sounds or objects moving, or what are called apports, objects appearing out of thin air and appearing into certain areas. All those are considered macro psychokinetic effects. Excuse me a second. So I hope that makes sense. So we're focusing on micro PK because it's easy to measure, and there's a lot of support for the existence of it through things like the Global Consciousness Project and the work that was done at the Princeton lab.
Yeah.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You're doing great.
So the other example where things can get confounded is in, like, let's say remote viewing. So I'm going to do a remote viewing of a target. And so I pick my target, and then I tell you what the target's going to be. And then you show me the target so that I can get feedback. Now, that feedback could actually be precognition, right? So if I'm seeing a target that if I'm trying to think of something that's going to happen to me in the future, that could be remote viewing, or it could be precognition, right? So those things are very difficult to sort out if you're showing feedback during the process, or if you're giving the viewer specific information about the target during the viewing process. And there's a lot of debate about whether or not you need to give feedback. Some viewers are trained so that they require feedback, others not so much. So it's remote viewing is an interesting area, because there's different schools of remote viewing that kind of teach it different ways and have different philosophies behind it. And so it makes it interesting to test, because you have to see which school and it goes from everything from target selection to how the targets are displayed to judging and the rules on how people determine whether or not you're actually giving the accurate information about the specific target that you're trying to view, which is, can I talk about the AI judging?
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay, so one of the ways we're trying to get around that, this sort of bias in judging, is we've actually built an AI application, or a remote viewing application, that includes an AI judge. So we send all the information along with the target image, all the information from the viewing along with the target image to an AI, and we say, compare all the things that the viewer gave us to the image and give it a score from 1 to 10. How accurate do you think the viewing is? And that system has worked out really well. I've been really quite pleased with the outputs and how accurate the judging has been. So we're playing with this idea of relatively unbiased judges. Because again, AI has its own set of bias, right? So,
well, we're using human and AI to kind of hopefully get around that. But, I love the remote viewing discussion because, there is a lot of, as I get deeper into this training and study with all the different folks, we as human beings just do really well at figuring out ways to have a reason to argue, and my way is right, your way is wrong. This is it's all PK. I mean, it's all precognition. None of it's remote viewing. But then we know Pat Price remote viewed things and died before he got his feedback. So we know that remote viewing is a thing, so where you don't get your feedback, many of the, so it just goes back and forth on, whether or not these things are clear. And both of our friend Damon Abrams and then yourself have both told me, and helped in my growth, that maybe these things aren't as clearly defined as we always want to say they are. Some of them can bleed into each other very easy, which is why I chose the 5 disciplines for anybody listening who's wondering why I chose remote viewing, mind sight, pendulum dowsing, psychokinesis, and then precognition, because quite often, if you do any of these things long enough, they tend to blur the line. So I talked to Paul Smith. He said, well, remote viewing and dowsing are like two sides of the same coin. One, I don't know what I'm looking for. I just get this tasking number, and then my consciousness goes out there and finds it. And the other one, I know what I'm looking for. I just don't know where it is, so I know it's somewhere around here. I'm looking for gold, or I'm looking for water. And, somehow my consciousness is able to tap into that too. So they're like two sides of the same coin. I told you in my own experience with Mindsight, I put the blindfold on. Somebody holds up a random card out of a deck of cards, and I'm able to tell them what it is. And they say, well, tell me what your seeing experience was. I actually didn't see it. I just knew what card it was. And they did it again. And I got it out of a deck of, 52 cards? Out of a deck of 50. On my second try, I got it wrong the first time. And then the second time I got the right card. So, but I didn't see it. I just knew what it was. So I don't know what the odds are that somebody would randomly choose a card out of a deck of 52. And the first time I get it right, the second try, I get it wrong on a new deck, on a new card. The second time I get it wrong, the first time I try, but the second time I get it right out of at that point, 51 cards, So, and not just calling out the card, I actually had to draw it on a whiteboard.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't actually have to say just the card. I drew it on a whiteboard and the number, by the way, but I didn't see it extraocularly. I didn't see it, but I saw it in my mind's eye. So that's kind of like this local perception that gives me the same feeling of like I get when I get a remote viewing correct, where I just know what I need to write down, but I don't know how I know what I need to write down.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. Go ahead,
I was just going to say, there's, not only do human beings like to argue, they like to put things in boxes, right? And they want to understand things very specifically. So I think that's where this idea of like, we have to separate remote viewing from telepathy and clairvoyance and like we want these things to be specific phenomena. But, again, I'm not a shaman, but I'm pretty sure shamans were sitting around going, I'm only going to do remote viewing today. I'm not going to do precognition. And, right? Like they live in this world of non-local perception, non-local information. And so me and people like Damon, we talk about general ESP or GESP, general extrasensory perception. So we don't get bogged down in was it really PK or was it really precog, or was the simple fact that we're able to do these things in and of itself is amazing. Oh, he just predicted the card. What? How is that even possible? What? That's crazy. We live in a world where that is possible, right? And a lot of people will tell you that's impossible, but guess what? It's possible. And that should change your worldview. That should change how you treat people and treat yourself and think about your place in the world and how your interactions affect the world around you. And like, that is profound. That's crazy. Okay. That's my little rant.
No, that was beautiful. Beautiful rant. Well, let's close out on that. But with that segueing into something that you said multiple times in this interview, consciousness is starting to seem like it's primary as we do more and more research. What does that mean to the layman? What can you explain what you mean when you say that?
What I mean is that the role of consciousness, who you are, what you feel, how you act, plays a bigger role in the world than the world has led you to believe. You were talking about divide and conquer, and a lot of our world and a lot of our society has taught us to be rugged individuals and look out for ourselves. But the reality is there's much more power in collaboration, and you have that ability to collaborate and change the world around you through your active intention and attention and your emotion and your caring and your love. And if we ever needed a time, if there was ever a time where we needed to think about coming together and working for a common good and a common goal, I would say this is it. So I can't say that, understanding that consciousness is primary is going to help you pay your mortgage better, or, lower your mortgage rates or whatever, but it's going to help you live in a world which is more connected, which will ultimately help all of us.
Yeah, maybe it helps us draw the person in who helps us at just the right time, and or some people are talking about draw in the money that you need when you need it, and being able to call that to you, and all these things that these stories that you hear as people live their lives that they say are synchronistic or impossible. It was impossible for that to happen at just the time I thought it was all over. It was all going down the drain. All of a sudden, some random stranger comes up to me and hands me the exact amount of money I need to solve the problem, or they say the just right thing to help me get over the hurdle just at that right time.
And sometimes you're the random stranger, right?
Yes.
That's the other, right? It's not just like, oh, I attracted the right person. I was attracted to do this thing, or I felt motivated or compelled or whatever to donate or talk to this person or smile at somebody on the bus today, and whatever, right? Like all that stuff matters. It all matters.
Yeah. We all have those stories of talking to, like I've had several where somebody will change their life and I don't talk to them for a while, and I've had a conversation with them after many years, and they'll say, "Oh, remember that conversation we had and you said X, Y, and Z?" And I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Well, that changed everything for me." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Really?" They're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm glad that can be of assistance to you." For my for-profit business, it's called Elite Guard, and the quote that I have, which is my own saying, I didn't take it from anybody. It's how I truly feel. It says, "Living to serve, and through service experience true living." And so this idea of letting go of the me. I still have my desires. I still have my wants. I'm still a human being. And I still, have this gross body of emotions and feelings and desires. But I found that when I have been the most selfless, that it actually served me the most. And sometimes that could be a play on word too. It allowed me to be the most selfish because, and in the sense that I wasn't trying to be selfish, but by being selfless, it actually served my heart. It served my mind. It served my energy. It made my body feel better. It made everything around me so much better. So sometimes people think it's me. I need to worry about me. And actually, by worrying about others, it actually serves you the most. It's actually, so the selfish thing really is to serve everybody else.
Right. But whatever. No, I get it. That's wonderful. I love that. I love that tagline for your business thing. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I applaud you, my friend. I salute you for being such a wonderful force in my life, to be there, the Psi Games and the games that we have. Unless, again, we're talking, you and our connection happened through this magic that we're talking about and discussing here. So that, and I would not have been able to have the Psi Games, the micro aspects of the Psi Games without you. I mean, you did it. You made it happen. I said, "This is what I'm dreaming." And you were like, "Oh, well, I think I can do that," and that magic is just something that's profound. And you've been a great force. I'm glad to have you as part of what we're doing. I see amazing things for us in the future. And thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Sorry.
Yeah. How can people find you?
The easiest way to find me is through my website, windbridgeinstitute.com. And if you want to talk to me, you can email me at mark@windbridgeinstitute.com. It's MARK. And and I'm pretty available. I get a lot of email, but I respond when I can. And unfortunately, I will not be able to attend the Psi Games. I will not be there, but I will be there in spirit. And I'm excited for the event. It sounds like it's going to be amazing. So
yeah. And many of the games you helped me create, people will be playing and watching. So that's,
well, I hope everyone enjoys them. And
yeah. Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Step into the beyond. Let your mind ignite. Where the limits dissolve in the glow of the light. A world unseen, we will rise to explore. Unlocking the depths above our universal core. Psi Games, let's push beyond lines. Where hearts, souls, and minds intertwine. Developing flow, breaking the chains.